Hey, folks, welcome back to episode 12. We finally are at an even dozen of the Carl Zahn Show. We want to thank everybody who is watching and commenting and subscribing and seem to be growing the channel bit by bit. So we appreciate that. Right out of the gate, wanted to respond to a couple comments that I had on last week's video. One of them was last week we had talked about Kristi Noem sinking her own ship when she wrote in her new book about having shot a dog in the face. And one of my watchers, and I appreciate everybody replying, had said that, and I had said that there's no comparison between, raising dogs and raising children. And someone commented and said that if I think that there's no comparison between the love of a dog and the love of a child, then I need a mental health professional. Clearly, I need a mental health professional. I make no secrets about that. If you've watched the show, you know that. But I did want to clarify and just say, I understand fully the love of a dog or a pet. A family pet can really be kind of paralleled with the love of a child. I used to raise huskies. I have my husky shirt on, although it's not about dogs, it's about husky aircraft. But nonetheless, and we lost a beloved husky at just 7 years old a few years ago from cancer. And yeah, it was just shy of losing a child. The heartbreak of that is right up there. So I just wanted to make some clarification here. You can certainly love a family pet the same way that you love a child, but, a dog, you have to teach them not to poop on the floor and chew the furniture. A child, you have to get through college, you have to prepare for adult life, and you have to prepare for them to manage themselves in an adult life. So I maintain my stance that raising children versus owning pets is a major difference there. So all kinds of stuff in the news this week. Of course, it's been a fruitful, bountiful week for those of us that like to comment on politics and the ways of the world. First, I have to just go quickly into Joe Biden finally broke his own land speed record for lying this week in an interview with CNN's Aaron Burnett, where he miraculously told 17 lies in 15 minutes. So even NASA is having trouble tracking the speed of Joe Biden's ability to, I'd say misspeak, but just out and out lies. One of the things he said in this interview with Aaron Burnett is that when he took office, inflation was at 9%, and that's just an out lie. Inflation was at 1.4% when he took office following Donald Trump. Pure lie, and naturally CNN, nobody calls him out on it or stops him and says, geez, Mr. President, that's not true. And again, this is, in my opinion, Joe Biden has just spent 40 years as a backslapping kind of car salesman type guy who just bullshits his way through everything and never gets called out on it. And you could honestly say that facts don't matter to him. And when asked about the economy in this same interview, he said, well, look at the money people have. People have the money. So it really is like a go eat cake moment of, screw the working blue collar middle class public. You folks have the money, and who cares if it's, $22 for a Whopper and a large fries at McDonald's these days. So complete disconnect from reality. But again, no surprise for Joe Biden. Donald Trump, as we record today, and this will be past news by the time we get this published, but today is Saturday, and he's doing a big rally in Wildwood, New Jersey, which is expected to draw up to 40,000 people. So it's going to be pretty fascinating to see how that goes today, given that Joe Biden's last little rally drew 100 people. So it's just kind of fascinating. So we got to talk about the elephant in the room, and no pun intended. Stormy Daniels took the stand last week, so to speak. Very interesting. And so the judge, on the onset of this, before she took the stand, the judge admonished everybody that we're not going to have or tolerate any salacious details. And then, of course, we went right into 2 days of salacious details. with the judge not admonishing or sustaining any objections or any of it. So there's all kinds of new dynamics now in wake of the Stormy Daniels trial. And, one of the first ones is that moving forward now, every time we talk about Trump's poll numbers, we're going to have to specify POLL or POLE. So now that's going to get confusing as we move forward, talking about Trump's poll numbers. You're going to have to ask, well, are you POLL or POLE? So that's going to add a whole different dynamic. Also, of course, the language hurdles that they had to clear in the courtroom, watching out not to use any double entendres, can't use terms like happy ending, big bang, money shot, any of that we couldn't have in the courtroom testimony because, of course, that's going to get immediately confusing. And it's interesting, too, that my understanding is that, and I haven't followed this that closely because it's just too lurid for me, but I understand that Stormy Daniels has made claims of being a psychic or that she sees ghosts on top of any other personality foibles that she might have. I would say she might be mistaking skeletons in her closet for ghosts, but nonetheless, she admitted on the stand that she hated Donald Trump. And she said at one point, and so you have to wonder if this is like a sour grapes type thing, she said at one point that Donald Trump had promised her a slot on The Apprentice, his former TV show. But then I heard, and again, this is unsubstantiated, so I don't want to make any claims, that what had actually been said was Trump had offered her an apprentice for her slot. So I think there might just be a little bit of a language mix-up there, kind of a semantics thing. She thought she was going to get a slot on the TV show, The Apprentice, when actually what he said was that he had an apprentice for her slot. Words matter. Stormy Daniels, just fascinating. And like I said, the fact that the judge admonished the whole courtroom, we're not going to tolerate any salacious details, and then they go right into 2 entire days of nothing but salacious details. Rumored also that Stormy Daniels now talking about doing a remake of 12 Angry Men, but it won't be a courtroom drama. You have to remember, too, during Bill Clinton's little tryst, which, by the way, was with a 21-year-old female intern, not a well-known porn star, I talk about salacious details without getting graphic. We all know the Bill Clinton story about the Oval Office under the desk and sodomizing a young girl with a cigar. So, not that we want to justify bad behavior with other bad behavior, but to be fair, you have to weigh this out and say, what's fair? Is this fair or not fair? Whole thing was an exercise to humiliate Donald Trump, humiliate his family, and in true Trump style, everything I see looks like this is going to roll off Donald Trump's back and only strengthen him in poll numbers. So very interesting. But again, going back to the Bill Clinton thing, 21-year-old intern Paige at the, obviously the power dynamic there of her feeling like, the president is in love with me. I have access to the president. I was in the Oval Office with the president. I think, purely despicable. But to compare Stormy Daniels, who has more mileage than a FedEx van, with what happened with Bill Clinton, I just think it's crazy. And the other dynamic that's been interesting to me in all of this is the cultural acceptance of having a porn star in the public eye, and they keep calling her an adult film actress. Well, she's not Katharine Hepburn or Kate Winslet. Calling Stormy Daniels an actress, I think, is maybe a bridge too far. She's a prostitute with a camera. And for those of us who have children, and especially daughters, I'm really mortified at the kind of overall acceptance of this line of work as a legitimate way to make a living when most of us raising kids are saying, you have to think about yourself and your soul and your character. I mean, this is why people don't sell drugs for a living, or most of us don't, because you don't want to live with the bad karma of the cultural damage you're doing because you chose an easy way to make a living. And I think for someone like Stormy Daniels, laying on your back while you get marauded by multiple men is just a way to say, I'd rather lay on my back than actually educate myself or go earn a living like everybody else does, because your own self-worth doesn't matter. So I'm just amazed at the cultural dynamic here that nobody mentions as anything derogatory to say about the way she makes a living and the impact of that on our culture and our young people. She's not Katharine Hepburn. She's not Kate Winslet. She's not an actress. And the only talents that she has are, talents that most of us would not be boasting about. Excuse me. So the Stormy Daniels trial, and that will be followed by Monday, Michael Cohen taking the stand. And you could almost say, kind of a different type of porn star. Michael Cohen, equally sleazy and slimy as Stormy Daniels. Not sure that he's been in any multiple gangbang scenes, but he's right up there with being a porn star. He's just another guy who's sleazy and slimy and made his living doing untoward things. And it's so funny. They have this gag order on Donald Trump, and, again, the notion of just the phrase gag order being levied around, tossed around in a trial where there's a porn star on the stand is, I'd be avoiding the word gag, but that's just me. But nonetheless, they have this ridiculous gag order on President Trump where he can't say this, can't say that. And yet Michael Cohen is out there, basically has developed his own show, all revolving around this trial. So Michael Cohen is monetizing his involvement in this trial. And Stormy Daniels, I understand, has now come out with this line of candles that has something to do with the trial. I'm pretty sure it's probably a candle that you hold over your head and let the hot wax drip on your face, but I'm not sure about that either. So I don't want to make any claims that are unsubstantiated. But again, monetizing the trial in all these different various ways, and the whole thing is an exercise to humiliate Donald Trump. I think it's going to all blow up in their face. And again, not to please pardon the pun. So moving on to different stuff, there's other fascinating story last week. We talked about a few episodes ago, Trump derangement syndrome and the 3 stages of TDS, stage 1, stage 2, stage 3, and then the final stage, of course, which is TDS hospice, where you basically need full-time hospice care. And there was this utterly ridiculous story. And again, this goes to the virulent immaturity of the far left as I see it. It's just like screaming children. We're seeing it on the college campuses. And by the way, I think the protests are just going to stay after colleges close for summer break. We're going to become a country of full-time protests. We are becoming that country that 20 years ago we would look at other countries where there are always these mass protests going on in the street, violence, property destruction, sham court trials of political figures being ousted out of office through these phony judicial hearings. We are that country now. We are just, becoming Bangladesh before our very, very eyes. So I love this story. A few weeks ago, a former CNN reporter, Michelle Kosinski, took to social media last week talking about how she is haunted, ladies and gentlemen, by a dinner with several friends of hers who she said at first glance seemed normal. And this is a quote from Michelle Kosinski. All of them were well-educated and successful in careers. Michelle Kosinski recalled of the recent dinner party that she described on X. They seemed great on the surface for like an hour, the one-time NBC News correspondent continued. But slowly, over a few drinks, they began to let slip their true MAGA nature. The 50-year-old who served as CNN's White House correspondent until 2020 went on to add how she was surprised by the revelation, marveling at how a, quote, normal group of people could support a politician that she does not approve of. And oddly enough, in kind of a PTSD post-flashback, her recollection of that story reminded me of a traumatic experience that I had, and honestly, I think I had subconsciously buried it. And I'll be honest right now, I've never talked about this with anybody or discussed it in public or otherwise, but I had a similar dinner experience. It was right after Trump was elected in 2016. I was at this beautiful restaurant in Boston, all glass, overlooking the harbor. You could see jets coming in and out of Logan. And it was just me and this couple that I had met at a windmill symposium that afternoon. And they seemed like really great folks, Chad and Amanda. So our salads came, and I pointed out the full moon that was rising over the ocean. And we joked how the light was shining off of my chowder spoon. And I noticed something strange happening. Chad's voice becoming hoarse, and he was seeming agitated. All the while, Amanda was just prattling on and on about windmills and Save the Whales and the planet. She seemed completely disconnected from what was happening. Our dinners arrived, and I noticed facial hair starting to grow on Chad's face. It was almost like a Disney time-lapse movie. I continued to eat, kind of thinking that if I just kind of, carry on as if everything's normal here, maybe this will work out. So I continued with my dinner, acting kind of nonplussed, but then his arms began to swell, and he was grunting a bit. All again, Amanda just chatting on and on about climate change and eradicating Jews. And then suddenly Chad, her husband, leapt onto the table on all fours like a rabid dog and just started eating his steak with his mouth. It was unbelievable. And then I noticed he had developed fangs, and he was howling at points now. And to my astonishment, a furry tail began to grow out of his ass. It was then I glanced at the full moon and back at Chad, and I realized to my horror, he was a Trump supporter. I snapped my fingers for the waiter to bring a check and announced abruptly that I had to leave. And the worst part was that I had to pick up the check because Chad's hands had transformed into paws and he couldn't get his credit card out of his fucking wallet. Yeah, I still have nightmares. All these years later, I tried watercolor painting. I even bought a potter's wheel at one point, but nothing seems to help. Trump supporters should have to wear a big red hat or something, just something, so the rest of us don't get caught off guard like this, like me and Michelle Kosinski having dinner with people that we think are normal and then turn out to be Trump supporters. They're like rats in New York dragging their pizza slices and empty beer cans around. It's horrendous. So my complete solidarity with Michelle Kosinski and your horrible dinner party. I don't know how you survived that or how you even carry on after all these years. It's like one of those World War II stories of the guy who survived his 25th mission and, somehow made it home and carried on with his life. So I feel so bad for Michelle Kosinski there. Hard to believe that she was a White House correspondent and a CNN reporter. And again, the fragility that these people willingly show to the rest of us with like a complete lack of self-awareness. Dennis Miller, the great comedian friend of mine, they called it like emotional hemophiliacs. And I think I've mentioned that before, and it's so true. It's like they have a little emotional wound, and then they just can't stop bleeding. There's not enough gauze or a big enough tourniquet to put on any wound to stop the bleeding. And yet their complete lack of self-awareness about the whole thing. It's just so stunning to me. Another one last week that kind of surprised me was the analyst S.E. Cupp, and that's S.E. and her last name is Cupp, C-U-P-P. And I think most people are familiar. She's got some notoriety, been around a long time. But she was on talking about how Trump supporters have low standards. Says Donald Trump has a fan base that don't care about all the things that would normally drag down a candidate. And I think Joe Biden's voters are demanding better, demanding more. And again, I just can't imagine a view more contrary to every reality that we are seeing. I mean, Trump supporters have low standards, but Biden supporters don't have low standards? I guess it depends on what standards you're talking about. If you're talking about standards of leadership, then there is no comparison. There just is no comparison. And again, I implore people, if you could take your emotion out of it and just look at results and leadership, there's no comparison between these two men. None. Joe Biden has no standards. No standard for himself. He has no standard for being honest with the American public or even being honest with himself. I have to admit that I take some kind of sublime glee in watching the Democrats try to wiggle their way out of all these boxes that they have cornered themselves into. And it started with day one with Joe Biden, the attack on the energy industry, which most people know, if you're a pragmatist, that's going to cause inflation. So you attack the energy industry, the cost of oil and all these energy products goes through the roof. We become now dependent again on Middle Eastern oil, foreign oil, a trap that Donald Trump had got us out of successfully. And of course, that spiraled out of control, affecting the cost of everything. If the cost of oil and diesel fuel doubles, it costs twice as much to move it, manufacture it, warehouse it, disperse it to the public. Everything goes through the roof. So from a purely pragmatic standpoint, very predictable result. Shoplifting's not a crime. Very predictable result. People who don't have the inner balance to say, I'm not going to steal because it's wrong, and less of those people all the time. So people just start cleaning out stores, and then eventually the stores close. Predictable result. The open border. Millions of people flowing in here. Just last month alone, enough people, the equivalent of the population of Philadelphia in 1 month. From a pragmatic standpoint, this can't be sustainable. It's not tenable. And yet now they've boxed themselves into this corner where they can't back out of it. They can't do any aggressive change on the border because that will affect the outcome in November. They can't lower interest rates because inflation is continuing to climb. So they've boxed themselves into a corner on inflation, on the interest rates, how that's affecting the real estate market, credit card debt, all of that. They've boxed themselves into a corner in Israel by not managing these things properly from the very beginning. Same with Ukraine. Never should have let that war started. Israel, we understand that. October 7th, vicious terrorist attack by Hamas. Of course, they're going to answer that. But the lack of management on our end now leads us to this point where Biden is saying no more arms to Israel unless they conduct the war our way. And why would they, after Afghanistan and almost every conflict we've been involved in the last 20 years, which has ended horribly? We waddle into these things like half-drunk swamis and then wonder why the whole thing turns into a complete mess. So boxed in on Israel, Gaza, boxed in on the protests on college campuses. Biden administration can't do much about it because if they get too pro-Palestine, that affects their chances in November. So everything has a political equation for the Biden administration that they can't unglue themselves from. But at the same time, if they continue on the current path forward, their chances in November get increasingly diminished. So you got all these young people now, and Biden, the Democrats want those votes. All these young people now that say, we hate Israel, wipe Israel off the map, complete anti-Semitism off the rails in this country. And by the way, I think that's always been there. Something about, Israel, Hamas, all of this allowed the far loony left to finally say how they really feel about Jews and the Jewish population, just as when Trump was elected, liberals felt licensed to finally say how they honestly feel about conservatives. They hate us. But I don't think the sentiment is new. I think what's new is the vocalization of it. It's kind of like alcohol, right? They say you lose your inhibitions, and there's always a little bit of truth to what people say when they're drunk. I don't know because I haven't had alcohol in probably 35 years, but I know people that do, and myself when I was younger. So there's a certain amount of truth to that. But nonetheless, Biden administration, they have boxed themselves into all these stupid traps that they wandered themselves into. Honest to goodness. Kamala Harris, another example. Nobody likes her. Nobody wants her. She's dumb as a brick and far less useful, but they can't shake her because if they get rid of her, they'll be called racist. They'll be called anti-feminist, all of that stuff. So they've got themselves, with this, barnacle, human barnacle that is Kamala Harris glued to the side of the Democratic Party ship, and there isn't a putty knife big enough to scrape her off. So the only way they get rid of her is to interject Michelle Obama or another black woman, because after all, that's what it's all about. And they have the same problem with Karine Jean-St. Pierre. Dense beyond belief. I'm not trying to be mean, but it's just, I think it's a demonstrable fact. These people are not that bright. Fani Willis, Letitia James, Kamala Harris, Karine Jean-St. Pierre, DEI hires, and anyone who's being honest with themselves looks at that person and says, if you think there's a deep intellect there, I feel bad for you, because there isn't. These are DEI hires, and when you go down that road and when you choose people for the wrong reasons for any occupation, this is how it comes back to bite you in the ass. And so, like I said, I take a certain amount of glee in watching Biden administration try to wiggle themselves out of all these horrendously stupid positions that they got themselves into that were completely and entirely predictable. And now, it's like a dog, to go back to the canine thing. And again, I love dogs, but it's like a dog when you get a little bit of dry poop stuck there, and they're spinning around in circles, and they're chasing their tail, and they're up on their back, and they're going completely hysterical, trying to get that little piece of dry poop off their fur, and you just never know. They will stop at nothing. And usually it takes a human, by the way, with a pair of scissors or shears to come by and help the dog. So who knows? Maybe somewhere there's a great Greek god with a pair of scissors that will come down and gracefully snip all these little pieces of dry poop off of Joe Biden's tail. Thanks for being with us, and as always, keep the blue side up.